April 30, 1975. The Vietnam War was ending, and American forces were evacuating Saigon. Within hours, every U.S. base in the area was abandoned. But just before the final evacuation, a radio signal came through from one of those bases. The strange part was, no one was supposed to be there. By late April 1975, everyone in South Vietnam knew the end was coming. North Vietnamese forces were closing in on Saigon from every direction. Entire provinces had already fallen. Military commanders knew they could not hold the city much longer. American personnel began preparing for a massive evacuation. The operation would later become known as Operation Frequent Wind. Helicopters flew constantly between ships in the South China Sea and rooftops across Saigon. Embassy staff destroyed classified files. Soldiers dismantled equipment they could not carry. Radio channels that had once been crowded with military chatter slowly began going silent. Every hour, another base shut down. Another group of soldiers boarded a helicopter and disappeared into the sky. Across the countryside, dozens of American installations were being abandoned. Some had housed hundreds of troops. Others were small listening posts hidden deep in the jungle. By nightfall, most of them would be empty. About 40 miles outside Saigon stood a small American radio listening station. The base wasn't large. Just a few buildings, several tall antennas, and a small operations room filled with radio equipment. Its job was simple: monitor enemy communications, intercept transmissions, and send intelligence reports back to command. The soldiers stationed there rarely saw direct combat. Their war was fought through headphones, through voices carried across invisible waves in the air. One of those soldiers was a 24-year-old radio operator named Daniel Harper. Harper had arrived in Vietnam 2 years earlier. Most of his days were spent in the dimly lit operations room, listening to distant signals. Sometimes he heard routine battlefield communication. Sometimes frantic calls for help. Sometimes nothing but endless static. Over time, he became used to the strange feeling of hearing voices from miles away. Voices that often vanished without explanation. But nothing he had heard before prepared him for the night Saigon fell. On April 29, the order finally arrived. Evacuate immediately. Destroy sensitive equipment. Leave nothing behind. Helicopters would arrive before nightfall. The men at the listening station began preparing to leave. Documents were burned in metal barrels. Communication devices were dismantled. Hard drives were smashed with hammers. Outside, the tall radio antennas stood silently against the darkening sky. The war was ending. And for many soldiers, that realization brought relief. But for others, it brought something stranger. An uneasy feeling. As if the sudden silence meant something was unfinished. Before leaving, Harper performed the final radio sweep. Standard procedure. One last check across every active frequency. He slowly turned the dial. Channel after channel was empty. Bases that once flooded the airwaves had already gone quiet. Most had been evacuated hours earlier. But then, a signal appeared. Weak. Barely audible. Yet unmistakably human. At first, Harper thought it was interference. Signals sometimes bounced unpredictably through the atmosphere. But as he adjusted the frequency, the static cleared. And he heard a voice. Hello? Is anyone receiving this? Harper straightened in his chair. The signal wasn't coming from enemy communications. It was an American military frequency. From a nearby base. A base called Eagle Station. But Harper knew something was wrong. Eagle Station had been evacuated earlier that day. Every soldier stationed there had already been airlifted out. He checked the evacuation logbook. Confirmed. The base was empty. Yet the voice continued. "Command, this is Eagle Station. Do you copy?" Harper picked up the microphone. "This is Listening Post Charlie. Identify yourself." There was a brief pause. Then the voice replied. "Corporal James Walker." Harper flipped through the personnel roster. The name was there. But according to the evacuation report, Walker had already left. Hours ago. Outside, the sound of approaching helicopters could already be heard. The evacuation team had arrived. Other soldiers began gathering their gear. But Harper stayed in his seat. The radio crackled again. Walker's voice sounded confused. "Command, the base seems quiet tonight." Harper pressed the microphone. "Walker, your unit was evacuated earlier. Are you still at Eagle Station?" Silence. Then Walker answered slowly. "That's not possible. I watched the helicopters leave." Harper felt a chill. "Did you board one of them?" "No." Walker paused. "They said another helicopter would come for me." The room suddenly felt colder. According to the records, no second helicopter had ever been scheduled. The signal crackled again. Walker's breathing could be heard through the radio. "Command. I think someone is outside the fence." Harper leaned closer to the speaker. "Who is it?" "I don't know." Walker sounded frightened now. "I can hear footsteps." Harper asked the obvious question. "Do you see anyone?" Another pause. "No." Walker whispered something else. "There are dozens of them." Harper's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "They're standing in the jungle. But they're not moving." The radio signal grew weaker. Static began swallowing parts of the transmission. Walker's voice trembled. "They're coming closer now." Harper gripped the microphone. "Walker, listen carefully. Leave the base immediately." But the reply came in a quiet whisper. "I don't think they want me to leave." Another long pause. Then Walker said something that Harper would remember for the rest of his life. "They look like soldiers. But their uniforms are old." The signal suddenly distorted. Walker's final words broke through the static. "They're trying to come inside." Then the radio went silent. Minutes later, Harper boarded the last evacuation helicopter. By the next morning, Saigon had fallen. The Vietnam War was officially over. For years, Harper rarely spoke about that night. War had given him enough memories he preferred to forget. But one question never left him. Who had been speaking on that radio? Decades later, military records were reviewed again. Eagle Station had indeed been evacuated. Every soldier had been accounted for. Except one. Corporal James Walker. His name was listed as missing in action. No body was ever found. No explanation was ever given. But the strangest discovery came years later. When an old tape recording from Harper's listening station was finally examined. The entire transmission had been captured. Every word. Every moment of static. And in the final seconds of the tape, investigators heard something else. Dozens of faint voices. All speaking at once. No one ever discovered what truly happened at Eagle Station that night. Maybe it was a damaged radio signal. Maybe a soldier left behind during the chaos of war. Or maybe something else entirely. But on April 30th, 1975, just hours before Saigon fell, a voice called for help from an empty base. And no one ever answered. Sometimes the war ends. But the echoes never do.